tonight, when you watch someone chase a viral trend, uprooting their entire life for a chance at sudden fame or fortune, it probably feels like a distinctly modern kind of madness. But the real story is far stranger. It happened once before, on the banks of a quiet river in California, and it didn't just make a few people rich, it reshaped an entire nation. You know the phrase, gold rush. It's become shorthand for any frenzied stampede toward opportunity. But the real event behind that phrase is stranger, faster, and far more destructive than the legend allows. It began, of all places, at a sawmill. In January 1848, a carpenter named James Marshall was building a water-powered sawmill on the American River, working for a Swiss-born landowner named John Sutter. Sutter had built something close to a private empire in the Sacramento Valley, a vast estate called Sutter's Fort, and he wanted lumber for it. Marshall was simply inspecting the mill's tail race, the channel that carried water away from the wheel, when something caught his eye in the shallow water. Small, yellow, heavier than it looked. He picked it up. He bit it, a crude test miner still used to check softness. He hammered it flat instead of shattering it. Another sign. Marshall was almost certain, and he was right. He had found gold. Here is the detail almost no one remembers. Sutter did not want this news to spread. He begged Marshall and his workers to keep it quiet. Why would a man who had just discovered gold on his own land want to hide it? Because Sutter understood something the rest of the world hadn't yet grasped. He had built a fragile agricultural empire, and he knew instantly that gold fever would destroy it. Workers would abandon his fields. Strangers would trespass across his land by the thousands. He was right about all of it, and his silence changed nothing. The secret leaked within months. A merchant named Sam Brannan, who owned a store near Sutter's Fort, saw an opportunity far more reliable than digging. He gathered a vial of gold dust, walked the streets of San Francisco, and shouted the words that would ignite the frenzy. Gold! Gold! Gold from the American River! Brannan wasn't hoping people would believe him for glory. He owned the only general store for miles. Every person who rushed toward the gold fields would need shovels, pans, boots, and food, and Brannan intended to sell all of it. Within weeks, he had reportedly earned far more from merchandise than most miners would ever earn from gold itself. The historian H.W. Brands, in his book The Age of Gold, argues that Brannan may have been the single greatest financial winner of the entire gold rush, without ever swinging a pickaxe. By the time news reached the East Coast, and then the world, in late 1848, San Francisco was a town of roughly 1,000 people. Within 2 years, it exploded past 25,000. Why would people abandon everything for a rumor about dirt? Because President James Polk himself confirmed it. In December 1848, in his address to Congress, Polk publicly verified the discovery, and that single act of legitimacy detonated something unprecedented. Newspapers reprinted his words across the country and across the Atlantic. Suddenly, this wasn't a rumor from a distant frontier. It was confirmed, official, presidential fact. The people who came to be known as the 49ers, named for the year 1849 when the migration truly exploded, arrived from everywhere. Farmers from Ohio walked away from their fields mid-season. Sailors deserted their ships in San Francisco harbor so completely that the bay filled with hundreds of abandoned vessels, their crews vanished inland. Miners came from Chile, from China, from Australia, from France. Entire towns in parts of rural America emptied of young men almost overnight. The journeys themselves were brutal. Some traveled overland across the continent, months of exposure, disease, and starvation along trails still scarred with abandoned wagons. Others sailed around the entire tip of South America, a voyage of 5 or 6 months around Cape Horn. Still others gambled on a shorter but deadlier route, crossing the malaria-thick jungles of Panama by canoe and mule before catching a ship north. And what did most of them find when they finally arrived? Almost nothing. This is the twist buried under a century of romantic mythology. The overwhelming majority of gold rush miners never struck it rich. Easily accessible surface gold, the kind you could pan from a riverbed with your bare hands, was largely gone within just a couple of years. By the early 1850s, the real profits had shifted to industrial mining operations backed by investors, and to the merchants, like Brannan, who supplied the miners rather than competing alongside them. Meanwhile, the human cost mounted in ways rarely mentioned in the legend. California's Native American population suffered catastrophically. Before the gold rush, the historian Benjamin Madley estimates the native population of California at roughly 150,000 people. Within just a couple of decades, disease, displacement, and organized violence, often funded directly by the new state government, had reduced that number by well over 80%. Madley, in his book An American Genocide, documents how California's legislature actually authorized funds to pay militias for campaigns against native communities, framing extermination as a matter of settler safety. Chinese immigrants, who arrived by the thousands hoping for the same opportunity, faced a different but equally brutal reception. California imposed a foreign miners tax explicitly designed to squeeze wealth from immigrant miners, particularly targeting Chinese workers, while offering them almost none of the legal protections given to white American miners. And this chaotic, overnight population explosion had consequences far beyond the goldfields themselves. Before 1848, California was a sparsely populated Mexican territory, only recently ceded to the United States after the Mexican-American War. Congress had been locked for years in a bitter, slow-moving debate over how new territories would enter the Union and whether they would permit slavery. The gold rush shattered that slow timeline entirely. California's population surged so overwhelmingly fast that it bypassed the normal territorial process altogether, drafting its own state constitution and applying directly for statehood in 1850. That single, rushed admission upset the delicate balance of free and slave states in Congress so severely that it forced the Compromise of 1850, a fragile political patch that many historians view as one of the final failed attempts to hold the fracturing nation together before the Civil War. A pile of yellow flakes in a sawmill's tail race had, within 2 years, helped destabilize the entire Union. By the mid-1850s, the rush itself had largely burned out. Sutter, the man who tried to keep it secret, lost almost everything. Squatters overran his land. His workers vanished into the goldfields, and he spent much of the rest of his life petitioning the government for compensation he never fully received. The man on whose land it all began died relatively poor, chasing reimbursement for an empire the gold itself had destroyed. So what actually changed because of this discovery? Not just wealth, and rarely for the people who dug it up. A territory transformed into a state almost overnight. A fragile national balance shattered years ahead of schedule. An indigenous population devastated at a scale historians now openly call genocide. And a myth, polished smooth over generations, of individual opportunity and self-made fortune, even though the truest fortunes went to men selling shovels, not swinging them. You have felt some version of this pull yourself. A hot stock tip, a trend everyone insists you're missing out on. A rush towards something everyone else seems to already be chasing, certain that this time, the timing will work out for you specifically. It rarely does. It rarely did in 1849 either. Most who chased the gold went home with less than they started with, if they made it home at all. Tonight, when you watch someone chase a viral trend, uprooting their entire life for a chance at sudden fortune, you are not watching something new.